That's great. All right, welcome to another episode of Remote Voices. Our guest today is Liam Martin. Liam, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about you, your company, and what you do.
Sure, guys. Thanks for having me. So, name's Liam Martin, human being on planet Earth. More specifically, I am at my COVID escape bunker somewhere up in Canada around Montreal. I've been here for about 6 months. I have founded a couple companies. The ones that are applicable to this conversation is Time Doctor, which is a time tracking tool for remote teams, and then Running Remote, which is the largest conference on remote work. Been doing the Running Remote one for about 3 years and the Time Doctor one for about 9 years. So been working remote for about 15 years. Would love to talk about anything and everything connected to remote work. I know that we're probably going to get into a lot of that, but it is absolutely my favorite subject to discuss.
Well, then you're in the right place. What is your background as a founder? Are you a technical founder? Are you more like the CEO fundraising type? What's kind of your skill set?
Well, because I've been doing remote for 15 years, I was the bootstrapped type, right? Because like way back in, when remote wasn't what it is today, which is nuts. And we should definitely get into like pre-post COVID visualization of what remote work is and what it was. You couldn't raise money at all, right? Like I remember we were about 2 years into Time Doctor. Our numbers were good. I think we were doing about 2 million-ish, 2.5 million-ish ARR at that time, and got a bunch of term sheets. And they all thought our numbers were great, growth was great, all this kind of stuff. And they all wanted to give us, $5-10 million bucks. But they said, you just have to move to Boston, Palo Alto, Toronto, Montreal, London. And we're just like, yeah, but we're about remote work. Like the tool is about remote work. We're all remote. So shouldn't we continue to be eating our own dog food? And they're like, yeah, nah. I mean, we're VCs, just trust us. This is what you should be doing. So we told them that that was a really fucking stupid idea and just decided to continue on going bootstrapped. And when you see anybody that's like 10 years plus in terms of remote work or remote work tools or remote teams, the vast majority are bootstrapped because they just couldn't get the funding, which I actually do think has made that segmentation, that cohort of startups, a lot more scrappy and a lot more kind of resourceful, basically.
Well, let's go right into our first slide here, because I think it's exactly what you were just talking about. It says our pitch deck's dead. Just invested in a startup that sent their overview on Notion. Included problem, solution, video demo, biz model, team, fundraise, and market. Found the format great for quickly getting. I love how it just says for quickly getting. Nice. But I mean, I think to kind of extrapolate a bit off of this, we just raised this year, couple times actually. And, very similar experience that you had kind of prior to COVID, which was raising from VCs out in the Valley, and kind of the feedback being, you guys are going to get smoked because you're not here in the Valley hiring Valley talent. There's no way you'll compete against the big guys because they've got, 10 times as much money as you, and they're hiring the best Stanford grads that money can buy. And we just politely disagreed, right? Like that's just not, the rule. It might be your rule, but startups can thrive without being in New York City or being in San Francisco. And I think that applies kind of to the tweet as well. The way of doing things before, the classic pitch deck format, the where your company had to be stationed out of, none of that stuff is valid anymore, and it's not necessarily important. I mean, do you agree?
Yeah, San Francisco's fucked. Just straight up. They're in such deep shit. They don't even understand how big of a problem they have. I think the golden age of startups are over, and I think COVID basically killed it. So you will never, ever have a $400,000, $500,000 developer in the future. And the reason why that existed is because, so like in the Valley, in San Francisco, what percentage of people that work in tech startups do you think are immigrants?
Oh, geez, I have no idea.
Yeah, don't know any numbers.
5%.
53%.
Wow.
Holy crap, really?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. About 5 years ago, we ended up hiring a guy that got top 5 finish in the Facebook hackathon, global Facebook hackathon. He got an offer from Facebook for 400 grand. He got an offer from Google for 350 grand. We hired him for, and I guess I'll disclose the number, like a nice 65, 70 grand, right? Which is like middle America.
A normal amount of money to pay someone.
Yeah, but he lives in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Right. So he lives in Bangladesh. That's like making $500,000 in San Francisco, as an example. And he wanted to stay with his family. And literally he was saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to take like a 85% pay cut to be able to work with you guys because I get to stay where I'm at. And when you look at the reality of what's happened, Twitter is now remote. Google says they're going to be remote for the next 2 years. Facebook is going 50% remote. Shopify is completely remote, even though they're not a Valley company. All of these large companies are going completely remote. There is a mass exodus from San Francisco. If you look at Redfin, which is a website that measures where inquiries are going in terms of real estate, San Francisco and New York have the fastest net exodus of any city they've ever seen on their system. And it's mostly going throughout the Midwest. So you're going to have a first wave, which is just sort of like $4,000 developer can now work remote that works at Twitter. Sweet, cool. I'm not going to be in San Francisco anymore. So I'm going to go back to Timbuktu, wherever the hell you're from in the Midwest. Or maybe I'm going to go to Bali, right? And that's going to happen for about 6 to 18 months. And then all of a sudden, these San Francisco tech companies are going to recognize, and Facebook is already doing this, by the way. They are basically saying, we're going to pay less for talent that's outside of the Valley. So they're just going to be able to take advantage of these types of things. I mean, tech companies like ours have been taking advantage of this sort of loophole in terms of remote work for years and years. A perfect example of this is Envision, right? Which I think is one of the fastest growing companies I've already seen that's remote first. And their entire business model is, well, we went remote because it was an HR decision, because we can hire people from the Midwest and Canada for a third of the cost, and they're exactly the same quality of talent.
Yeah,
so that will just continue.
I never boxed myself into the reason why we hire remote is because it's cheaper. I guess mine is I've found that I'm able to find the right people by not limiting myself to a 30-mile radius.
Completely agree with you. And to a large degree, we have exactly the same philosophy. For us, we can find exactly the right person that we want, but competition is going to get way harder, right? So if you were like that 53%, they were imported by those tech companies at a significant cost. Now those tech companies, and like, you know, when you're a small team, you've got to think about culture. You got to think about how you're going to put that together. But when you're 20,000 people, it's dollars and cents, right? Like if I can bring in a developer and I can spend $50 million less and have exactly the same product produced, that's an inevitability. I think there's going to be a second wave of what has classically been defined as outsourcing, but I think that that's fundamentally quite a racist term. So like if you're remote and you have a MacBook Pro and you're in Manhattan, or sorry, if you're in a coffee shop in Manhattan from MacBook Pro, you're remote. But if you're working, you're outsourced.
Yeah, exactly. If you're from a third world country,
it's just like, right. It's just like you're just as valuable. It's just that there is competition and that market is just going to get a lot more competitive. And it's not going to happen in the next like year-ish, because companies like, I was just looking at, they were just hiring the director of remote for Facebook. And it was a very interesting job application, by the way. You had to be located in San Francisco.
I know. I
don't know
saw.
if you saw that.
Commented on our last stream was just that like there was also. Oh, I was on a panel yesterday with Cameo, and I saw that Facebook was hiring a new head of product for like Messenger, and the location requirements it said SF Menlo Park, and then just in parentheses it said remote during COVID. And I was like, man, why you just can't give it up? Like you can't like relinquish that little piece of your job requirement?
Yeah, no, it's I think they're moving. It's just going to be slow, right? So they're testing the waters right now. We definitely deal with a lot of large enterprise clients when it comes to remote work, and it's just a slow process. And COVID has accelerated that, right? Like pre-COVID, it was 5.5% of the US workforce was working remotely more than 4 days a week. Now it's 58%.
Yeah.
So
the numbers are
we've seen a huge pop, right? So like that's going to happen, and it's going to go down obviously after COVID, but there's going to be a huge push-pull situation where the employer says, hey, looks like the team was working just fine. They're just as productive as they were before COVID. And I don't have to pay for this office, which costs 30% of my P&L. Maybe I should drop that. And the employee is going to be like, you want me to come back to the office? I thought I was doing a good job. Like you didn't have any problems while I was working from home. Why can't I keep working from home? So that's going to be a big thing that's going to happen like, man, April of next year, I think, because like once the vaccine comes out, those conversations are going to start. And it'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays itself out.
I 100% agree. Do you think VCs are going to get on the same trend and, continue to back startups that they've never met in person, who aren't hiring in these key locations and aren't going to move? Or do you think that they are just waiting for the return to the office and going to continue to try to keep people to do that?
I think VCs are just pattern recognition machines fundamentally, right? So like if they have an N that's statistically significant that says that remote works, then it's going to probably be a requirement, right? More than they'll be like, well, you could buy this office in San Francisco, but we're raising 5 and it's going to cost you $2 million just to set up the office. Why don't you not set up the office for $2 million? And that gives you an extra $2 million that you can spend on user acquisition. Yeah. That's at least my perspective. But I don't know if you guys have ever had Andreas Klinger on.
Yes. He's not been on this podcast, but we've talked extensively.
Yeah. So Andreas he started a fund called Remote First Capital. And it was started at the Running Remote conference where we were just sort of nudging him into like actually doing this. And, he's now in a really good position where he's doing follow-on rounds with a whole bunch of really big VCs because he understands remote work better than almost anyone else on planet Earth. And those guys are really feeling that out in that context. Like I've always had the thesis that remote work is going to become the dominant way of working within the next 10 years. And this was pre-COVID, and we just got accelerated by 5 years, like in the last 3 months. But that thesis is still valid. So if you invest in remote work tools, then eventually you will own, a nice big part of that stack. And that's been a pretty big thesis, pretty successful investing thesis on my part. But it just went nuts with COVID, right? Like no one would have expected that this would have theoretically happened. So I think that VCs are basically understanding the same kind of pattern. They're realizing that remote is here to stay and it's not going to change.
Well, yeah, I mean, that certainly helps us in our industry as well. Hunter, you want to read this next tweet?
Startups are a test of will, not intellect. That is quite the statement. I'm actually curious what you think of that coming off of your startup.
Man, I have the same kind of statement. It's a little bit different, which is startups are about survival, not success. If you can just stay alive long enough, you'll figure it out. That for me is basically, and particularly when you talk about remote companies, remote startups, when you couldn't get any venture capital to kind of juice you up, even for stuff that you really wanted to do. Survival. It's just like, can you stay ramen profitable enough that you can build up the revenue, and particularly in the SaaS space, right? If you can just get that engine working and you can get your head above water, it's an inevitability that you're going to become successful. It just, are you going to do $1 million ARR? Or are you going to do a 500 million ARR? But you're going to be somewhere in those two extremes, which are both definitions of success. So
I think it
me,
also
it's not really will.
timing.
Go ahead.
Just to say, I think it factors into timing as well. Like your will/survival metric is not only about staying alive, but it's also about being successful in a convenient time in which it has the ability to pop off. Like we've talked to a lot of like startups that have done very similar stuff to what Yak is doing, and they launched in a time in which remote wasn't, a priority. The audio space wasn't as hot as it is right now. Like, and if they had just stuck it out, not that they gave up too early, sometimes a business can't get traction and it has to shut down, but it's also a testament to the fact that like, if you can keep your thing going long enough that you find yourself in an opportunity to pop off, that also can be a success metric.
Yeah.
HQ is a good example of that too. I mean, I don't know how much of a startup they were, but they definitely just needed to last another year and they would have been unbelievably.
It is interesting to think about what HQ Trivia would have done now during quarantine, but they just couldn't quite stay alive long enough to make it through the downtime.
Yeah, no, I mean, COVID is it's a perfect example of all remote work tools, right? Like the space was pre-COVID, the space was probably worth about $1 billion cumulative, and now it's probably worth 100 billion realistically out the other end, right? And it's just like none of that has been recognized. Like that's the other thing that's crazy is there are companies. We had a government deploy on our system recently, and they had no idea what they were doing. And they were still using like Excel spreadsheets, and they just like that were all on their own Windows machines, and they didn't even have Office 365 to collaborate the doc to like have them all up in the cloud and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, holy crap! Okay, you're just at the beginning of this process. Like you haven't even started. There's probably $1 billion worth of ARR just in this client in terms of their full technology stack that they need to deploy. And like when we look at where remote is, a lot of the times we're stuck in the perspective of tech startups, which is a lot of tech startups have adopted remote work and they're kind of the tip of the spear. But the reality is that remote work is going to be the average friggin' call center agent in Berlin. That's just like, or in Kiev somewhere, that's just doing their job. And they all need to have the same technology that we really understand quite easily here. I'll give you an example. I had another friend of mine who's a consultant for large enterprise and remote, and he had to spend 3 weeks training 2,000 employees how to use Slack properly, like literally bringing them into a room for an hour and a half and showing them how to use Slack. And we laugh at that.
That's like a whole thing that they offer for like enterprises. It's just like training because so many large companies just don't know how to use Slack.
Yeah, it's crazy. I find it nuts. But again, we got to pull ourselves out of who we are as theoretically ideal customers and put ourselves into like the real customer's mindset.
I think a lot of people in tech tend to fall in that, especially they lose touch, if you will, with like normal people and forget how normal people operate and like what tools they're accustomed to using in their day-to-day lives. Like we've talked to so many people who, one, actually didn't even know Slack existed, but then two, to your point that you just said, get super confused on like how to use it or just like what it is really.
Yeah, no, I've been, I mean, and you can use Slack, you can use Twist, which is a really great tool if you want to have one that's a little less annoying. And we've always kind of had these tools and they've been synergistic with everything that we've been doing. But, I have my in-laws, I'm staying in my in-laws right now. And I was trying to teach my mother-in-law how to use Zoom. And it took like 25 minutes to like teach her how to do it.
I think everybody.
And I'm just like, holy shit. Okay. Wow. Like, but think about that, right? Like that is the reality of the average worker that is now currently remote, not like wants to become remote, but they've been thrown into this situation. And that's, I think, actually why you're seeing a lot of pushback on remote. It's because we just got thrown into this way too quick, and now people are super stressed out.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, that this was not the ideal way to be introduced to remote work the first time, because it's already a stressful situation. It's a pandemic. People are worried about getting food and toilet paper. You know, it's not the gradual training version of like moving a org to remote. It's just throwing it at them all at once. But, you know, we got this tweet here from Peter, who's actually an investor in Yak through BetaWorks. Says, I don't have a problem investing in founders I've never met in person. I figure they're going to have to be good at convincing lots of people to do stuff only over a Zoom call. So why not start with me? And I think that's interesting because like the back end is he's saying like, what are product demos going to be? How are you going to do your sales? Like if you're good at convincing me, you're probably going to be good at convincing other people. And this is literally going to be a skill set moving forward of just like
100%
remote pitches.
Yeah, well, and the other thing too is, do you have a product that works? Do you have customers? Do they pay you money? Like that goes a really long way to figure out whether or not you're going to get, you're going to get some backing. I remember I ended up chatting with one of the founders of Stripe, and I was asking him, how did you pitch everyone to raise this money, right? Because he was already very successful. And he said, it was nothing about success. I literally just went to VCs and I said, give me your credit card. And then he would literally, he would process a payment to the credit card on his phone. And then he would just give it back to him. Like that was, or no, it wasn't Stripe, it was Square, sorry, Square. So he literally processed a credit card to his cell phone and then gave it back to him. And he's like, that's the concept. Right. Yeah. And like, that's super simple, right? It's just like, it's under 5 minutes. It's really quick and effective. And if you can back those up with customers, like I don't make any investment unless you have customers, because at this point, if you have no product, like no product whatsoever, you're in an age now where you can put that together for such a small amount of money that I don't really know whether or not you're ready to get into this game, because you're not willing to go through the pain of kind of grinding through and pulling out a shitty product and actually trying to convince a customer to buy it.
Couldn't agree more, man.
All right, what do we got next? So we got the moment you realize working from home is the same thing as living at work. I talk about this all the time.
Yeah, this is huge.
My friends used to always say, like, oh, you're so lucky. Like, you don't have to go into the office. I'm like, or I just never get to leave work. You think about it like that.
Yeah.
On my end, so we've been doing a lot of really interesting studies of recently remote companies. And on average, a remote worker, their workday starts about 2 hours, about an hour earlier and ends an hour later than an on-premise worker who are recently remote. And that sounds initially quite bad. However, there actually are quite a lot of gaps in between those times. So there's a lot of times that they're like out walking their dog, or they're taking a really long lunch or something like that. So I actually have a very, internally for us, we tell everyone like, hey, you should really set working hours, and then all of your devices should just get shut down. So and I'm probably not the best example of this because sometimes there's emergencies. You guys were trying to get in touch with me as an example. And I didn't answer my email because I was just like, okay, I was working on something else and I just really need to stay focused on it. But I did actually see now there was an emergency text to me. So the system did work, but I just didn't answer my text. Set hours, right? Like when you're done, my Slack shuts down. My email on my phone shuts down. I can't answer emails on my phone after, I think it's 6 p.m. or something like that. And that leaves me, it's the classic debate between synchronous and asynchronous communication. And that's kind of like, to us anyways, it was remote 101, at least at running remote. And the discussion about that is pretty clear on my end, which is, I don't know your thoughts, but to me, asynchronous is the way to go. It's just a lot less stressful of a life as opposed to getting text messages at 3 a.m.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously huge fans of async here. I think there's a lot more that has to do with this. I mean, Jordan and I talk about just like the ability to get up and go for a walk and come back to something, or like I have a specific room that I don't go into unless it's work time. Like I just don't use that office space unless I'm supposed to be focused on work.
Liam, do you do anything like that? Because yeah, like Justin said, one thing that we think about a lot is like reserving certain physical spaces. Like, all right, this is where I do work and I only do work in here. Or like, you know, I think you covered a little bit, like certain tools are only for work. So do you guys do anything like that? Or do you do anything like that personally?
Yeah, my computer is only for work. My iPad is for consuming like entertainment, YouTube, Facebook, social media, that kind of stuff. And I keep those divided. I do have a office in my home. I used to have an office that was about a 5-minute walk, but when COVID happened, we shut that down. But like, the problem is that that's not the average person, right? Like if you have the money to have an extra, like I'm sure there are people listening right now being like, cool, dude, you have extra money to do that. Congratulations. What I used to do when I didn't have any money is I had a spot on my couch that I only did work on. So if I sat on that spot, it was work. And literally, if I got a text message from a friend of mine or I wanted to do a call, I physically got up from that spot on my couch. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but it definitely worked for me to be able to get myself focused in on what I was doing. And then also on my end, I use Time Doctor when I start work. So I literally break down all the tasks that I have. I put them into my task manager and I figure out which one's the most important. And then I start work. And that's a Pavlovian trigger for me to say, okay, I'm in now work mode. And you know, I'm not going to go onto Facebook. I'm not going to go onto YouTube, because the reality is that there are more distractions working from home than there are in an office. Just that's the reality, is that like I'm looking at my PlayStation right now, right? I like PlayStation, but and it's one of those things that's like, it's not in an office. So it's always available to you and you need to be able to fight those. So creating that sacred space is super important in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other misnomers here is that working from home is not equally synonymous with remote work. Like one of the things, Hunter, I know you do is, you know, you're like the king of working out of a Starbucks or a co-working space or finding a spot, right?
Oh yeah.
And why do you do that versus working out of your bedroom?
Because my bedroom has one window and Starbucks has 14 windows facing the ocean.
So it's a window ratio issue.
It's a window to room ratio.
So if you lived in a glass house, you'd be fine.
As long as it was 200 yards from a Starbucks, from a beach. Absolutely. Yeah. So I don't know if you know Melbourne, Florida, but I literally can sit in the Starbucks facing the ocean and I can see people coming in and out all day long. Like that's what I do. And for me, that's like the perfect way to work, because now I have coffee. I can actually work. I don't have to worry about anybody bothering me, but now they stop me from my yak stickers. But yeah,
I got a question for you guys actually, which is you brought something up for me. You guys just raised money for Yak. I don't know if you're disclosing how much you raised, but you raised some money. Are any of your investors letting any of you go nomadic, or is that not cool?
No, I mean, that's been a requirement from the beginning that we're not always going to be at the same office together. We may not be in the same state together. We hired a developer from Seattle, and he had a very cush job making great money there, and said, hey, I want to travel the world. And my existing employer said, well, you can move to one of our 4 Nexus, tax nexuses. And he said, yeah, well, I want to move to Serbia for a month, and then I want to move to Italy for another month. And so he contacted me and said, hey, can I come back and work for you guys? Because you have the flexibility to work from anywhere. I said, yep, absolutely. That's, our shtick, is that we have that full flexibility.
Yeah.
So yeah, for our investors, that's been a given from day one.
I think actually since the beginning of the year, this is like the 6th time that us 3 founders have been together in person. 6th, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
wow.
Very rare.
I mean,
here.
That's great, guys. I know I just got off the phone with Selena, which is a network of co-working hotels. I don't know if you know their brand, but they've got about 60, 70 locations throughout like South America, Central America, that kind of stuff. and they just implemented a nomad pass because they believe that they're obviously hurting right now with COVID, right? No one is traveling, but their thesis is that digital nomadism is going to like 100x after COVID because everyone's now going to be able to be free and do what they want. So much so that I've actually made quite a few investments in real estate in nomad hotspots because they're so cheap right now to be able to buy. My thesis is that the Airbnbs will go through the roof. Yeah. I don't know what your thoughts are on that one, but it's like, it's got to be, I think there are so many people that are just being given the keys to true freedom, but because it's not remote work, it's working from home. It's this scary COVID virus is going to kill you if you go outside. They haven't yet realized that. And, I think it's going to be really exciting to see what happens a year from now because
absolutely. I think a year from now, like there'll be a reset and everyone goes, well, this worked out really well. And the downside was being locked in your home all the time. But the upside is that now I can work free from an office.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be, I mean, I'm very excited about the future and, you know, I don't want to say, well, I feel almost like there is a silver lining to this, which is freeing people from on-premise work relationships, which has just been, I mean, remote work is the biggest single thing that you can do to be able to improve a worker's lifestyle, right? To make them happier, to boost their eNPS. So we've just done that en masse and nothing's been realized yet because of this scary COVID virus, but afterwards it's going to get crazy.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Hunter, this is your baby right here. So why don't you talk with Liam about this?
Liam, I don't know if you're going to be a part of it, but we're actually going to be hosting the very first ever remote week with Running Remote. So we were talking to the folks over at Work From, and they were going to have their AMA the day before Running Remote, which is August 12th. And so I said, why don't we just make it this week-long event? So I don't know if you know the latest, but actually in this tweet, I talked a little bit about it. We're going to have a coffee social happy hour with KP and Cuppa. We're going to have the AMA with Darren Murph and Work From. Obviously, Running Remote, you guys have a bunch of stuff going on that day on the 12th. The 13th, we're talking about getting Twitch Pitch, which is going to be absolutely amazing. That's going to be a whole event in itself, obviously. And then the last thing will be VC Survivor with the boys over at Matchbox VC. So we've just got this big long event going on, man. I just want to know, are you gonna make it?
I'm in. I mean, I just literally, you guys have all of my my secret booking links. So if you book me there, I appear magically. It's just like, you know, I just float from space to space. So this is awesome. I think this is the other thing too, is that the community was really tight knit before COVID. And I think it's only definitely that same tight-knit community is there, but it's just getting so much bigger, so much faster. And it's so exciting to be able to see this kind of stuff because I mean, you know, I really believe in remote work. It's fundamentally, we kind of call ourselves a remote work company, not necessarily a time tracking company or a conference company, as an example. Yeah. So that's so cool that you guys are doing this. That was one of those things when you had mentioned a couple points before about Yak and raising money. One of our biggest assumptions inside of Running Remote was there had been people that had tried it, but they all failed. And one of the things that I like to do whenever I run through coming up with a new business idea or a new feature is I ask myself, what assumptions am I making from my conclusions? So have I made a conclusion, and inside of that, I'm making assumptions inside of that conclusion. So I like learning more about remote work. Maybe I'm not that big of a group of people, right? Maybe there's 50 people that would show up to an event like this, not 500 or 1,000. And thankfully I was wrong. I did a lot of research to be able to figure out whether or not that was the right decision or wrong decision. But fundamentally, me and Igor just had a ready, fire, aim type of situation. So we just cut a check for $100,000 for the venue and said, okay, well, if we end up screwing up, at least I'll be able to learn a whole bunch of really cool stuff from these fantastic speakers. And maybe I'll just be the only one that watches, right? And thankfully that wasn't the case, but it's just like, it's such an important thing to be able to break that down. And I'm so happy that we went in. And one of the other parts of this was trying to encourage other people to do the same thing. Like we wanted other conferences that were about remote work. And so it's really inspiring to be able to see you guys putting this kind of stuff together, because that's exactly what we need right now.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this. Actually, Yak was supposed to launch at South by Southwest and Running Remote. This past Running Remote, you guys obviously canceled. But one thing that I'm really
sorry about that
is that not a single one of these events would have been possible if COVID didn't happen. Like KP actually got furloughed, I believe, from Delta during COVID, started Cuppa. So he's going to be hosting the first day. Day 2 is from work from. So they completely pivoted their entire company from an in-person, like where can you work where there's like free Wi-Fi, to completely working remote. So like that event is impossible. Running remote obviously wouldn't be possible to do for Remote Week, because up until recently, they just were all completely in person. Twitch Pitch just recently started, and then VC or Matchbox VC just started within the last few months. So it's really cool because like we've been networking for a long time, but like we're now in the position where we can actually bring these people together. And I honestly don't think we would have been able to do it.
I was going to say the same thing. It's like what I think you said, Leanne, which is that there's obviously a tight knit community, but I think what's neat is that everybody that's kind of heralding this remote work lifestyle and, you know, building remote work brands, we all know each other. We all love each other. We're all trying to like bolster each other's businesses and build events together and have people on this podcast and have people on Running Remote. Like we're all kind of like in it together, which is good, because even though a lot of times we're even competing with each other for, you know, I guess an app icon on someone's desktop, because we may have products that kind of cross over. I still love that, like at the end of the day, our mission is equally the same. And if one company, you know, Hunter says this to me all the time, is like, if X competitor gets more people to adopt this way of working, all that does is help us, because that just means more people are already prepared to go remote.
Totally. Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head. I've been reinforcing this with all of our, like particularly my marketing team, is I said, okay, do you really want to go after some competitor that, like, we have competitors that go after us, right? That like write comparisons about us and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, cool. Do you want to spend your energy doing that, which is the 1% of the space? Or do you want to go after the other 99% that have the problem, but they don't know that we're the solution? And that's the group that you need to go after, right? Like the space got so big so quickly that like we don't even know how big this space is. And we won't realize that until at least, I'd say probably 24 months from now, that we'll actually recognize, like, Yak, and whether it's you guys or someone else, there's going to be like $1 billion company that comes out of the type of stack that you're trying, like the type of problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah,
absolutely, completely. There's going to be $1 billion company that comes out of that space. Hopefully it's you guys. Could be someone else
too,
right? But it's like, you know, but who knows? I mean, you guys might know, but like, I don't know, right? At the end of the day. And that's a very exciting concept, because that market didn't exist pre-COVID. Like that market was probably, and even on our side, like, you know, it was like, cool, you got, maybe you could do 150 million ARR, right? Like, and that's the tip of the ice. Like that's it for you. That's the entire iceberg. But now, like this space is easily 10x'd today. And I think it's probably going to 10x again within the next 2 to 3 years. So it's very exciting to see all of these different products come together. That's why I have this thesis about investing in remote companies, particularly remote tools, just like Andreas, because I think that is, if you do nothing else, if you literally invest in like the S&P 500 of remote work tools, your return on investment is going to be ridiculous.
Ooh,
even if you invest in the worst ones.
I think we need to build the S&P 500 of remote tools.
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, like, well, that's Andreas. that's Remote First Capital. That was his exact thesis. And if you have him on, I mean, I don't know if he can tell you, but I would probably say the portfolio has 40x'd. fundamentally, right? And it's just like it's
awesome.
insane. Like it's just the products that he has inside of his portfolio are bonkers, are out the door. And
to be fair, did they start at like $100 or something? Just
I mean, like literally what I'm talking about is like when those companies exit, he'll have 40x that portfolio.
Oh, I see.
Sorry,
Okay.
he'll have 40x that fund, right?
Gotcha.
So like that will, and that's probably going to happen in, I don't know, the fund will exit 5-10 years from now, something like that. And that will be, I already see it just from the companies and what they're doing and the type of traction that they're getting and, you know, the rounds that they're now raising and all this kind of stuff. And got in on the absolute ground floor of all that. So there's still a ton of money there, right? Like there's companies like yours, there's companies, and I'm sure there's probably people listening right now that have remote work tools. My thesis is just invest in all of them, right? And just kind of see what's going to happen, because even if you invest in bad ones, if you have a thesis behind your investment mindset, for me, it's remote work is going to become the primary way to work within the next 5 to 10 years, then all those tools are going to be really neat. Even if you end up being tool number 4 in the space, that's still a really good, that's a really good return on investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have gone a little bit long today, so we appreciate you hanging out with us. Where can all the listeners find you, find Running Remote? How can they get into contact with you? Anything to sign up for? Drop some links and make some plugs.
Runningremote.com is where you can sign up for our next free event, which is happening, as you had said, August, I think it's 12th, 13th, 14th. And if you really want to kind of learn about Running Remote in a deeper way, I'd suggest the YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/runningremote. All of our talks from previous Running Remotes are up there for free. So you can just consume as much of that content as you want. And some of the stuff is like how Shopify's director of support deployed 3,000 remote workers in 2 years, as an example, on the high end. And then even on the low end, you've got someone like Andreas, who built a top 100 website product hunt in the world on a dev team of like 20 people. So we've got everything and anything in between. And then outside of that, if you just have any questions, just ask that question on YouTube and I shall appear.
Awesome. You're quite a magical person then. People mention you or book on your schedule and you just move into existence.
Processes and documentation, that's a core component of who I am. So there's protocols in place, and then I can get back to doing deep work and make sure that I'm not just talking to 78 people all day long and not doing anything.
Yeah, we're the same way. Well, appreciate you coming on, man. I'm going to play out with some outro music, and thank you so much, man.
Yeah, thank you, Liam.
See you, bud.
Thanks for having me.